So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and we're going to be returning to the battle replays this time with a 2v2 on Dry Lake Bed actually, which I don't think we've seen Dry Lake Bed ever since the Frozen variant was introduced, so back to an old favourite here. And I do have obviously still the Dol Amroth one in the pipeline, but again, finding the time to do a very long siege battle is a little bit difficult, and also I do have a 4v4 that I want to do relatively soon as well, in addition to sort of getting into some of the sort of top 10-esque videos, but I think maybe a channel update video will be required to sort of fully flesh out my thoughts on how to best proceed in that fashion. But today we will be having a look at two alliances with one Evil Men faction and one Elf faction, and on this side of the battlefield we have Second Pink playing as Harad with his ally Mark XMD playing as Mirkwood, and across the way we have Lucky Hussar playing as Rune with his ally Eclipse 2500, who's going to be playing as Imladris. So interesting. I feel as though the risk in terms of factions will certainly be on Harad and Mirkwood, because it's easier, I think, to pick bad armies with both of these two factions, whereas Rune especially, there's a little bit more leeway with the kind of compositions that you can bring, and obviously very good all-around faction. But we will start off with the first member of the blue team over here, Second Pink. He's got some Hashari Stalkers out here on the flank, of course. The Ranger unit for Harad, which potentially, of course, can deal incredible amounts of damage across the course of a battle, but of course quite poor in a skirmish fight, especially as far as going up against the Elves would be concerned. And of course Rune have got plenty of numbers that they can use to overwhelm a skirmish unit like this. Over here we have a slightly dusty looking Serpent Guard. Of course it is in the desert, of course, their home turf in many ways. Good Lancers, not multiple HP of course, but still quite swift, and as long as you can keep them moving they should do a decent amount of damage as the battle goes along. And then over here we have another unit of Serpent Guard, so two units of just basic Serpent Guard here. I'm sure that you've seen that they do have a rather heavier unit of cavalry in the background over there, but more on them in a moment. Haradrim Archers are a relatively common first line in for Harad because of their ability to absorb arrow fire, of course, and there are a lot of them per unit, so they are going to go toe to toe with the lower tier Runic Archers if that is the approach that a Lucky Hussar has taken, and it'll be a relatively even trade. I think the Haradrim Archers would very slightly lose to Eastron clan Archers, but even so, it would not be a significant victory or defeat either way. And then back here we also have a full line of Haradrim Spearmen, so the Militia Spears. Can't expect these guys to get a huge amount of kills, but they will at least form an expendable front line, which of course I imagine is exactly the sort of thing which Second Pink has in mind here. The power will lie elsewhere in his line, and over here again we can see the dust has gathered on these Southron Warband and the Southron Pikemen, so he's got both armor-piercing sort of spear units, I suppose you'd call both of them. I think there's an invisible rock there, but yes, obviously good armor-piercing core here. Going to be very difficult for Rune to wear these guys down from the front, especially considering the reinforcements that are just behind them. Having said that, in terms of stats, they're not the best, so they will be leaning upon their AP quite heavily to get the work done here. And then over here you can see once again we have two units of Trollmen of Harad, so this is where the majority of the money is going to be going with regards to the Haradrim infantry, of course. Powerful, going to be able to outmatch most Runic infantry 1-to-1, but of course their backup is going to consist mainly of lower tier troops, so we'll see how this approach works. And we have the Champions of Nafrat over here, which are essentially super Trollmen. They ditch the shield for increased attack values and of course that multiple HP. And then obviously going to be a very significant factor on the battlefield whenever they are brought the Mumakil. Interestingly enough, Rune do have a potential hard counter to Mumakil in their roster. We'll see if Lucky Hussar has brought them. But if not, the Mumakil could wreak havoc in the Runic lines and really help equalise the fight, so that a lot of these lower tier Harad units can get in and amongst it and hopefully get some decent value off. Mirkwood, difficult faction to use, one of the most difficult factions to use in my opinion, and we'll see how Mark XMD gets on. We have the Yara Branon Inanwaith, I should say, and obviously this is the multiple HP spear cavalry that Mirkwood have, so in terms of a cav-to-cav fight, this is the best that they can muster, although generally speaking they're not bad in a sustained melee. It's if archers get in and amongst their cavalry in which they start to have a bit of trouble. The Arathalion Inanwaith as well, which are the footbound variant, of course, previously known as the Elder Palace Guard, two-handed spears. Very, very deadly as far as an individual unit goes, but they can be overwhelmed, of course, so interesting to see how Mark will use this. And then the first skirmish line, we can see two units of Hiri Peng, slightly more tanky than any other any other non-multiple HP Mirkwood Archer, I should say. and of course there is the potential for a lot of hidden units within Mirkwood's army, but as far as a frontline archer goes, this is the closest they have to it, but it is worth bearing in mind, of course, that their armor values are not super high, and also there aren't as many of them as lower tier archers, so they could struggle here, but of course, individually speaking, very, very strong. It'll be interesting to see actually how Imladris match up against them, because the Elven factions will be going at it, and the Evil Men factions will be going at it as far as the factions have been deployed. Some Thrandrim Erin, of course. The Thrandrim and the Megal Erin are units which Mirkwood will need to rely on quite a lot for their numbers and their sturdy front line. And of course the Thrandrim with their spears, will of course have to potentially deal with a lot of Imladris' deadly cavalry as well. Single unit of Hiri Alth over here. A single unit will not be enough to really secure Mirkwood any substantial advantages as far as a melee fight will go, especially if Imladris have done what they usually do and invest quite heavily in their infantry. But of course, as an individual unit goes, it will take a unit of higher quality from Imladris to deal with, and you can't expect the Eldar Makar to trade too evenly with the Hiri Alth. Out on this flank as well, we have the Dagnirim Ik Erin, which are of course the Horse Archer. It will be interesting to see how they get along. If they hover too close to Imladris' archers, they will get melted. But potentially, if they are kept back for the later game, when Imladris have got less arrows, they could be a real nuisance. And then back here, very important tool here that Mark has brought. 2 units of Maethir Ilazgelen, which are of course Spear, Javelin hybrids. Going to be very important potentially for any Imladris cavalry that is brought. And if Imladris has not invested too heavily in their cavalry, they could be very useful for peppering down Imladris' decent infantry line as well. Back here we have a catapult, which is interesting to see. Good, you know, Imladris by the looks of things across the way is deployed quite compact, so we'll see if the catapult can get some good hits off. And then just in behind them we of course have the Yar Agwe Inanwe. So all of these sort of very strong Mirkwood units have been brought, and I think, yep, this is where Thranduil is hanging out. Very dusty looking with all the sand. Of course a very individually strong arch unit, but I do wonder if Mirkwood has maybe stretched themselves a little too thin. There are bound to be some hidden units in here, but not all that many based on the expenditure that they've already put into a lot of these expensive units. We'll see if this pans out for Mirkwood. It could, because they are facing off against a fellow Elven faction, so their lack of numbers might not actually be exploited all that well. We shall see. Eclipse 2500 has of course invested into its cavalry, Imladris I should say, well within their rights to do so with how strong they are. The Imladris Sentinels of course spear cavalry. With their additional armour of course they'll be a little bit more resilient to arrow fire, but they should be careful about going into Mirkwood's cavalry a little bit more in terms of skill. But 2 units of these Sentinels and then 1 unit of the Eldarenwe Harumairo, which are one of the strongest non-multiple HP Lancer units in the game. Full charge bonus of 20, and of course they have that shield, good armor values as well. Might even be the best non-multiple HP Lancer unit in the game. And then of course it looks as though Imladris is going to try and sort of go into the safety net of his ally over here, which will sort of narrow their advantages a little bit, and it will allow Mirkwood to come onto them a little bit more. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. But of course they have the Eldar Makar, very sturdy and very reliable frontline troop that Imladris have. Of course less armor value, but of course very high skill. So a lot of the Harad lower tier units will not want to get anywhere near the Eldar Makar because they will not get any sort of cost efficiency there. And of course we have some Imladris sentries as well. Very good pike unit, probably the single best pike unit in the game. The Southron pikemen's AP is not going to be enough to get them higher than the Imladris sentries in that regard. And then a couple of units of Imladris Guardians, so essentially the equivalent to the Hiri Alth across the way. And honestly, they should win that fight, I would imagine. Actually, the Imladris Guardians have got less men in the unit, and without their armour upgrade, maybe not, but still a very good unit, of course. And then a High Elven Ballista, so actually, if the Ballista gets into a good firing position, they could break the Mirkwood Catapult early. We shall see. And he has some Eldar Quinga over here as well as some Noratirna Warrior, so all of his skirmishes, including Eldarenwe Haru Quinga over here, as well as, actually that's Rune, but all of his skirmishers have deployed their stakes over here, so it's very clear what Imladris want to do here. They want to form a very strong defence with Rune. And a Lucky Hussar has got some Variag mercenary riders, very cost-effective Morse archers with the addition of that shield, of course. But even so, they are going to be outmatched by the Dagnirim just because of the accuracy and the expertise in other areas. Eastron Hunters, of course, they'll trade evenly with the Haraj Marchers for the most part, I would say. Maybe a slight advantage to the Runic Archers in this situation, but it's not going to be significant. And then there are also some Eastron Crossbows over here, which of course are going to be potentially very deadly at dealing with and zoning out the Haradrim Lancers. And then we also have some Eastron Warriors over here, just some two-handed, well, some dual-wielding swordsmen, I should say. And just in behind them, a single unit of Eastron Clansmen, which is stretched out to sort of give the archers a little bit of cover. Another unit of cavalry over here, another unit of horse archers, in fact. And then we've got some Gamprim, 3 units of them spread rather thin. Flagrim as well, spread rather thin, as well as the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen back here, of course. Potentially powerful. They could also, they're not as hard a counter as the Sapphire Bladesmen would be on the Mumakil. They should still do a lot of damage to them and potentially make them run amok with their flaming ammunition. And then the Dragon's Wrath Warlords, which are of course multiple HP Lancers. Very, very interesting indeed. And now without further ado, let us begin. Now certainly it's very interesting, I think, that Imladris have decided to take this tactic, because it's very clear of course that all of their infantry is going to move in here. The cavalry of course is a different story. They can be used a little bit more freely, but the infantry of course will be moving into Rune, and that will allow Mirkwood to surround them to a point. But time will tell whether Mirkwood has got the numbers to really make that count. And actually we do have the chariots back there as well that I just missed, the Runic War chariots. Again, potentially very, very useful, especially against the lower tier front line that Harad has brought. Now we can see the catapult coming in here. It's actually targeting the cavalry, which in my opinion is a mistake. This infantry is all in a massive blob. And honestly, if I was Mirkwood, I wouldn't be too concerned about the cavalry. You have the archers to zone them out. And also, if the Imladris cavalry got into a melee with your cavalry, you should be able to win. Although, having said that, there's only one unit of Mirkwood Spear Cav, so maybe they are a little bit concerned. But even so, the likelihood of you inflicting severe casualties onto a moving cavalry unit with an artillery piece is very low. You can also see these Imladris forces just pulling back. 14,000 frames is not a hugely long battle, so I would imagine that the blue team are probably going to move in, because it's very clear that Imladris, with the way they've set up, are going to intend to be a little bit more defensive. Now this is an interesting move. We can see over here that one of the units of Runic Horse Archers is moving forward. Now this, probably not the finest idea on the Runic players' behalf. I mean, they can absorb arrow fire a little bit better than most with those bucklers. But even so, Horse Archers are definitely not the sort of thing you want to put up against enemy archers. And if those Hashari Stalkers reveal themselves with some enfilading fire, those Horse Archers are going to get utterly ripped apart. Another hit. I mean, to be fair, I criticised it, but they are landing some hits with that catapult. Another hit there on the Imladris Sentinels. But even so, there is those more Imladris Sentinels. There's those Variag Mercenary Riders pulling out to assist his ally over there. I'm not so sure. I mean, the time to sort of take advantage of the Imladris type formation is largely gone, but the catapult could still be a very useful tool for smoking out this defensive setup that they've got going on. And the ballista is honestly not in a part of the terrain where it's going to be easy for them to shoot. Uphill a little bit there. Both players still, well, both teams I should say, still feeling one another out. I was thinking it was going to be elf versus elf and evil man versus evil man, but I don't think that's going to turn out to be the case now that Imladris has definitely mingled their front line in with runes. What's going on over here? You can see that the Variag Mercenary Riders coming forward. The Dagnirim are going to be returning fire, and I believe that Mirkwood got the first volleys off because of their increased range, and of course Rune were the ones moving into their range, which of course not good, as well as the Hiri Peng probably firing as well. Actually no, just the Dagnirim. So you can see, despite the fact that the Dagnirim not great in a skirmish fight, very low armor values, no shield, you do get what you pay for in the end, and they will still be able to drive off these Variag Mercenary Riders. And the Mumakil of course adding even more ranged firepower over here. Often forgotten part of the Mumakil's arsenal, that it does have that ranged attack. Most people just think of them as an organic battering ram. And there are a few crispy corpses, but it does look at, well, I said that, but another volley is coming forward, and it does look now as though they have changed attack, and they are landing some hits here. Despite the fact none of these hits have been particularly crippling, they are at least getting consistent kills with the catapult. One of the potential pitfalls of bringing artillery on an open field, of course, is that it can turn out to not be worth it. But so far they have got some decent hits, but they do need to sort of conserve a bit of ammunition, I think. The High Elven Ballista will be trying to get into a position where they can shoot the catapult though, so Mirkwood needs to look after that. Mirkwood have invested a lot into individually expensive units, and it's going to be up to Harad to really provide the cannon fodder in this situation. Shari Stalkers still remaining in hiding, which is a good move. But Rune are actually the ones moving forward at this point, which is kind of bold, but also not without merit, because looking at the compositions, I think Rune and Imladris, honestly, they should feel more confident about moving forward than the other way around, because Mirkwood have brought a small army, which Imladris, as soon as they get into melee, should be able to exploit pretty roundly. And Rune, of course, they can trade low tier units with Harad all day long, and it won't really affect either side, but it could be the Elven battle here which decides how this battle goes moving forwards. Eastron Hunter's still moving. Now this is quite a bold move by Second Pink, because Rune do have some crossbows in their ranks. So the Serpent Guard are moving forward. Now they won't be too bothered about the Eastron Hunters firing into them, but certainly the crossbows will do some pretty nasty damage. Ooh, some last samurai-like action going on here. But they do get in there. Bit of a stutter there on the frames, but the Dragon's Wrath Warlords are coming in, and of course the multiple HP and much higher armor values on this unit here is going to facilitate the rather rapid retreat of the Serpent Guard, but they do double back. And the Serpent Guard getting in. Maybe not the finest charge that you could ever get off, especially seeing as these Eastron Hunters are not in loose formation. Maybe the Serpent Guard would have expected to do a little bit better there, and they are shaken. They do stabilise a little bit, and they are getting into the Eldar Quinga, so for a single unit of Serpent Guard here, they are disrupting the skirmish line of Imladris pretty roundly. They're still going as well. I mean, Imladris were not prepared for this eventuality. I think they were hoping Rune would deal with this cavalry a little bit better than they have done. This should be the end of the Serpent Guard, however, because there are pikes right there, and indeed they do rout. But even so, going right up the line there, I'm sure the Imladris player wasn't too pleased that the Runic player allowed that cavalry to get so deeply into their sort of shared skirmish line at this point. Catapult's still firing in there. Eastron Hunters. The Haradrim Archers are going to get the first fire off, because the Runic Archers were the ones that moved into their range first, which should tilt the skirmish fight in Harad's favour, even without the Hashari Stalkers. Now there are those Eastron crossbowmen up on the hill. The presence of these Horse Archers over here is probably making it so the Hashari Stalkers don't want to reveal themselves just yet. Understandably, but these crossbows, very juicy target for the Rangers. They would rip through the Eastron crossbowmen. One of the squishier crossbows in the game. There is the Ballista, and they are going after the catapult and having success, which, again, this probably was maybe a little bit foolhardy from the Mirkwood player, moving their catapult forward. And now there's no sense in trying to retreat it, because they won't get away. There's only one catapult up and running now. They have got some decent kills, but honestly, nowhere near enough to make that catapult worth it. So ultimately, it's going to have turned out to be a bit of a waste for Mirkwood, and that is the Moomakill making hell of a noise, but that is the real risk when you bring siege equipment in. It is why, for the most part, siege equipment is not really brought in an open field battle like this. Oh my. The Variag Mercenary Riders uncovered the Hashari Stalkers by the looks of things. And it looks as though they're going to try and get into melee with them. Now the Horse Archers only have a charge bonus of 1. Not entirely sure why I've been having this stuttering of late. It's quite annoying. I haven't changed anything, but with only a charge bonus of 1, the Hashari Stalkers won't mind too much if the Horse Archers try and get into melee with them. There's Variag Mercenary Riders, of course, still over there. Now the Serpent Guard are moving forward, which now is the time for the Hashari Stalkers to pick a target, because the Serpent Guard are essentially going to sacrifice themselves to keep the Hashari Stalkers from being shot by the crossbows. And here go the Serpent Guard, and they are going to get into the Eastron crossbows, and the Eastron crossbows are not good in melee. But of course they do have multiple units of them. Meanwhile, it looks as though things are all kicking off pretty quickly over here. Have a look, Imladris with a frontal charge here onto the Mirkwood forces. The Hiri out. You know, taking that charge pretty well, all things considered. The Imladris Sentinels are not the sort of unit that will take it lying down. And the Abranon Inanwaith are now going to also collapse it on the Sentinels, and that will cause them to break as well. So Hethel E Tower also revealing themselves, so a few units of hidden units over here. An attack-focused unit. They should be able to do decently against the Eldar Makar as well, which will be a bit of a godsend for Mirkwood in this situation. And of course the Maitha Ilaz Gelen easily going to repel any frontal cavalry charges, the likes of which Imladris have been engaging in thus far. Bit of a chaotic frontline battle this, but Imladris jumped the gun a little bit here. I'm not sure this was the right thing to do, because especially when you see a mismatch like this, the Yarathalion Inanwaith going up against Eldar Makar, the Eldar Makar will not stand a chance against this unit in melee, especially not after taking some javelin fire on the approach. Meanwhile over here you can see the Imladris Guardians. They will do decently against the Hetherley Tower. Hetherley Tower actually pursuing something. Not quite sure what, but the Eldar Makar also in full view of the javelins and getting side down. So Mirkwood actually making the most of their army composition here. Maybe a bit of an ill thought out advance here by Imladris, and Imladris have committed a lot of their units here, so they're going to have to stay in there. They're going to have to hope, I think, that their very substantial skirmish line is going to be enough to deal with the low armor values on these. But you can see also that the High Elven Ballista was targeting the Mumakil and killed 2 of them. And they're running amok, so the Mumakil have essentially been lost. And I would worry at this point for the blue team. I think losing the Mumakil and the Catapult without getting good cost efficiency off of them, especially the Mumakil, is going to be a huge loss. Even with Imladris' honestly not great advance here, they are still making inroads in areas of the front line. And the Imladris Guardians should have some decent success here. I'm not sure what the Hetherley Tower were thinking. They charged right into the front of these Imladris sentries. Meanwhile, what's going on over here on this side of the battlefield? Come on. There we go. Serpent Guard covering the retreat of the Hashari Stalkers, although the Hashari Stalkers could find themselves in real trouble over here because the Runic War Chariots are on their tail. The Chariots, though, lose their bottle, and they do instead move to countercharge the Serpent Guard. They make the same noises as the Mumakil, interestingly enough. Now, the Serpent Guard don't have an anti-cav bonus, so the Runic War Chariots should be able to escape there relatively unscathed. And interestingly enough, you can see some Haraj Marchers also shaken, trying to sort of reposition their forces here, but Rune are going to be the ones to move forward. And these Haraj Marchers are also going to fall back behind the expendable front line of Harad. So let's move up to speed 1, which apparently causes frame rate jitters now. You can see here the Hetherley Tower fighting toe-to-toe with the Imladris Sentinels. And now some Hirti Peng that are out of ammunition reinforcing the front line against these Imladris Guardians. Might be enough to do some work. Eldarenwe Haru Myro have managed to sort of breach the backline, chasing off the Dag Niren. The Mumakil are running amok, although interestingly enough they are still coming back into melee into such a fashion that it will potentially help Mirkwood here, dealing some casualties to the Eldar Makar, and might deal some casualties to Mirkwood as well. Very interesting fight thus far. Thrandrami Erin. Thrandrami Erin, of course, don't stand much of a chance against Imladris Guardians. Very fine, heavy infantry indeed. Against more basic spears, although basic Elven spears are still a damn sight better than most other factions' basic infantry. The Arathalion Inanwaith, the full focus of a lot of the Elven's, well, the Imladris skirmish line across the way, which is understandable, of course, no shield, and of course their multiple HP will eventually fall by the wayside. Now, interestingly enough, Harad have gone primarily for their lightly armoured units, so the Gamp Rim and the Flag Rim unlikely to have as much of an effect as I'm sure Rune were hoping, although this front line of Haradrim Spearmen will still need a lot of support to stand up to the Golden Boys, and the Eastron Warriors will very much enjoy facing off against the Haradrim Spears. Eastron Warriors, this is exactly the sort of unit that they're going to enjoy fighting. They might be the cheapest dual-wielding unit in the game, and this of course makes them ideally suited for getting cost efficiency against militia units. Now Southron Pikemen coming in to shore up this part of the line, because the Haradrim Spearmen are having a bit of a torrid time trying to hold back the runic forces. Whatever happened to the chariots? Well, there are a lot of broken chariots back here. The Dragon's Wrath Warlords have also taken a bit of a battering, honestly. The body piercing of the Hashari Stalkers certainly didn't help, but yeah, I guess the chariots have fallen by the wayside, so yeah, they did. Ranged pressure was probably the cause of that. Southron Warband trying to fight on the front line, but they are shaken. Their AP will help them against Rune, but it will not secure victory. And actually, interestingly enough, they did bring the hard counter against the Mumakil, the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen. They were unneeded in the end, so now they can use their ammunition on the Harad front line. Normally I would say Sapphire Bladesmen wasted against Haradrim Spearmen. But honestly, at this point, if Rune can crack the Harad front line, they could find themselves in pretty severe danger. What are the Mumakil doing? They're still running amok. Interestingly enough, they have still at least done some work for the blue team. Mirkwood, however, are pushing Imladris back, despite losing their catapult relatively unopposed, and despite their high tier units taking a battering from the Imladris skirmish line. That was a lot of skirmishes Imladris brought, and ultimately they did not bring enough melee units, which is a bit of a folly in my opinion. If there's one thing that Imladris have over the other elves, it's a really sturdy front line, and they could have used that to great effect here against Mirkwood, but in the end their lack of infantry has allowed Mirkwood the advantage here, and there's also the Gwath Erin Gallen, and with their throwing daggers they finish off large swaths of the Imladris front line. And now the Imladris skirmishers will have to go into melee, so Mirkwood is getting the better of things over here, but their manpower is running low, and ultimately they might not have much left to assist Harad with, so Harad is still going to need a bit of a result over here. And there are still this one unit of Serpent Guard getting some nice rear charges onto Rune, and they will need to thin out the herd a little bit here, but these Sapphire Bladesmen, presumably they're out of ammunition because they have been committed to melee. With their sort of reverse scimitars there, curves the opposite way to how you'd expect. Rune actually didn't commit much to the middle here, and that has allowed the Haradrim Spearmen to get forward, and they will be able to disrupt elements of what's left of the Runic skirmish line from firing.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They've lost half their men.
But the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen have got a half-decent shot here into the side, and they have got a shot onto one of the most important Harad units as well, Champions of Nafrat and the Trollman. And without them, you would certainly imagine that the Runic Golden Boys would be able to pull out a victory here, especially with the Eastron crossbowmen in behind and the Flag Rim. The front line of Harad is falling apart. The Flag Rim also getting in behind. There are some Haradrim archers and the Hashari Stalkers still firing, but the loss of that Mumakil without it sort of getting any directed kills may prove to be Harad's downfall. We shall see. There is this unit of Southron pikemen over here, a nice pike block, and the Hirti Peng are also coming over, so already Mirkwood is actually coming over to assist their ally with the unit of Maitha Ilaz Gellan and some Hirti Peng, which is sorely needed, because actually over here on this flank, Rune are losing. Their Flag Rim and their Gamp Rim, all of this AP is not helping against all of the units they find themselves surrounded by. Sapphire Bladesmen have also taken a bit of a beating over here. I'd imagine they were the target of what was left of the Harad archers. Understandably so as well. But they will be moving in here, but the envelopment is already complete, so it's a bit of a waste of elite troops, honestly. Eastron Hunters still pursuing that unit of Haradrim Spearmen, which will probably rout here, honestly, with the Eastron Hunters enveloping them. What is going on over here? So the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, out of ammunition now, being committed to melee. They are very good infantry, of course. They're not going to be as strong as the Champions of Nafarat, but we shall see how this goes. I mean, honestly, Rune have not really gained all that much of an advantage, and part of that might be down to the polearms of Harad, making it difficult for Rune to really advance forwards, and also Rune's focus on AP infantry might cost them here. What's going on over here? Oh, as we move over, Harad's general destroyed by the Dragon's Wrath crossbowman. This Elven skirmish line is still able to fire in parts. There's also that Elder Enway Heru Quingo, which was sent forward as a sort of sacrificial lamb to stop the advance of Mirkwood. There is actually still some Arthalion Nanwaith, which should secure them victory over here, honestly. The Gwath being taken down. Mirkwood should still win this fight over here, though. There's some Hirti Peng over there as well, and also the Argway Nanwaith, which is still healthy, actually. Probably the one high-tier unit from Mirkwood that wasn't immediately targeted by Imladris' plentiful skirmishers. And this unit of Argway Nanwaith will be able to... Oh my, look at that glitch over there. Look at him go. And there he goes. T-posing. And another one's going to T-pose as well. There goes Imladris' general at the hands of the Hethelly Tower. But yeah, with the Argway Nanwaith, Imladris is going to get tidied up over here relatively quickly. And as we move over here, I'm not sure Rune, with the assistance of some of these individual Mirkwood units, I think they're going to be able to turn this around. These Eastron Hunters, obviously not going to be able to stand before Hiri Peng. And now the pikes moving forward. Now some runic troops did go backwards to try and shut down the Harad skirmishers, but honestly, where are the Hashari? The Hashari might have already been... Oh no, the Hashari retreated back further, I think. Yes, they did. They're still firing. Harajan archers being tasked with slowing down the flag rim, and now the Southron pikemen, covered in sand, are coming forward, and of course with their AP they'll be able to do a little bit more damage, just keeping this runic threat bottled up and allowing the Hashari stalkers with their body piercing to continue firing. Excuse me. But yeah, Harad are going to win over here, so it is going to be a victory here for the Harad Mirkwood alliance, which, if you'd have just told me the factions beforehand, I would have expected Rune and Imladris to win this one. They certainly have all the tools between them, and they are also easier to pick a winning combination from. Maythiel Asgellan, Hiri Peng, Harajan Spearman. One player admitted defeat, that was definitely Imladris. Their forces are going to be scattered, Mirkwood's going to hunt them down. And as we move into the final stages of this battle, Rune are going to continue to fight to the death, which is good to see, of course. But ultimately it is going to be fruitless. I think this was a really savvy army pick from Second King here. The Harad army was very well put together. He didn't bring some of the more heavily armoured Harad units, which they do have. The Serpent Guard, of course, the main example of a unit which is maybe a little bit more traditionally what you would associate with the human factions in the various Third Age mods. But yeah, Rune, I think maybe a Lucky Hussar should have reconsidered his army pick a little bit, because armor piercing was not going to help him too much against either Harad or especially not Mirkwood. Mirkwood have got very few units which you could consider to be heavily armoured. So I think maybe Rune should have gone maybe even more quantity I should say. Go for a lot of their lower tier units and then a little bit less in terms of the flag rim. Ironically, I think Rune perhaps should have been the ones to go more skirmish heavy, and Imladris should maybe have gone more infantry heavy, because it is very tempting to bring a lot of skirmishes against Mirkwood, and early on Imladris were able to make that tell a little bit. But ultimately, they didn't have enough infantry to deal with Mirkwoods, and that ended up being a sort of really devastating factor of that battle over there. There was also the Aradirith, which we actually didn't see during the course of the battle, but they did reveal themselves, of course, another very, very strong Mirkwood skirmish unit. AP and melee as well. But they were there, just picking off units that are routing. Trying to sort of figure out what it is that Rune have actually got left. Flag rim. I guess it's just this fight over here. Just the sort of the last few units of Dragon's Wrath crossbows are going to be the ones. Look at that low resolution desert bush there. Sacrifices must be made, and even still, I still had stuttering at the outset of this battle. Very unfortunate. Of course, Maythiel Asgellan. I've been a little bit critical of their melee performance in the past, but this time they, of course, were an excellent choice, helping to really deal with what looked like a pretty suicidal frontal charge from the Imladris cavalry. You can't afford to throw away units of value like that, especially considering that initially the red team did such a good job. The Imladris ballista taking out not only the Mirkwood catapult, but they also forced the Mumakil to run amok, which was a huge loss for Harad. But in the end, they really weren't able to make that stick into the late game. The cavalry was thrown away somewhat. And in the end, Harad had the right comp to defang Rune a little bit, and Imladris didn't have sufficient infantry to deal with Mirkwood's army, which again looked a little bit risky. And if Imladris had gone a little bit more in terms of their infantry and a little bit less wasteful with their cavalry, I don't think that Mirkwood army would have stood up too well to that sort of thing. But as it was, turned out to work out very well. Just a single Dragon's Wrath crossbowman left, and that's it. You can see where the front line was, all along here, and then Mirkwood punched through to Imladris. And from then on, it worked out very well. But even still, the red team, with Rune getting the most kills, but of course this was because Harad had by far and away well, not by far and away, slightly the bigger army. I think it was actually a relatively even fight between Harad and Rune, but the additional reinforcements that Mirkwood gave Harad certainly tilted the favour of the battle on one of those flanks in favour of the blue team. Unfortunately, Imladris didn't really have the right composition to deal with this sort of thing. I think initially Rune and Imladris wanted to set up a little bit more defensively, but the presence of that catapult made that slightly difficult. But yeah, having a look at some of the stats from Harad over here. 336 kills from the Southron pikemen. That additional AP can really help them, and there was nothing really that answered them. You know, they were going up against units which they can easily keep at arm's length, like sort of standard heavy infantry, getting a lot of kills, of course, with that AP, and of course no archers were firing at them because they were too busy firing at other targets like the Hashari. Speaking of the Hashari, 181 kills is decent for a ranger in an open field, and of course they did attract a lot of attention which would have been placed on other units otherwise. Serpent Guard getting good kills as well. Lancers are very prone to being completely misused, but in this situation they did well. The Mumakil, of course, good pick-off from the Imladris player. He definitely did some good things in this battle, and obviously the Mumakil, getting rid of them, or at least making them run amok, was one of them. One of the units of Haradrim Spearmen doing very well, but otherwise the Haradrim Spearmen were of course a little bit lacking when it came to dealing with the runic advance, but the rest of the units more than made up for that. So yeah, well-deserved victory from the blue team there, very well thought out. And next it will either be the 4v4 or the Dolanroth Siege, depending on how much time I have to do each one. And maybe a channel update in the near future as well to sort of explain a little bit more about where I intend to go next, because I am caught in a little bit of limbo here. I'm not really sure what to do with the channel next, to be honest with you. But yeah, we shall be going into the top 10s relatively soon as well, I hope. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.